sustainable development. Did Did you know the battle for sustainable development will be won or lost in cities? Today, 55% of the global population lives in urban areas, and this will increase to
here. Good afternoon once again. Thank you so much for attending this roundtable. And roundtable 1 is on financing, financing sustainable urbanization. So I would like to introduce our moderator, who will then subsequently introduce all the speakers. Mr. Daifert Ovry, my colleague, could you come on stage? Daifert is our coordinator for this SDG Cities program at UN Habitat. It's a flagship program, and with a lot of experience at the regions and also in the production of normative works in UN Habitat. So Daifert, over to you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Neil. Let me just put my notes down. So yesterday we had a very interesting session, a roundtable session, with some really eminent representatives of the finance industry, but also from local government networks, and other experts to really look at the question of financing sustainable urban development. And there were certain outtakes which were, I think, quite important. One was that we are moving towards massive changes, global changes, which impact on cities. The shift to digitization has an impact on economy, the way that we work, the way that we live. Other issues such as the shift towards decarbonization also has a massive impact. And we need to balance what's happening, understand how these global trends are affecting our cities, while also holding on to the concept of the city that we need. And it was identified that a lot of investments in cities have been around cities' economy, a lot of investments around climate issues, but less investments around society. And there was a need identified for investing more in the social environment as well as in a more caring economy. And we started to explore, well, what does that look like in terms of financing the city? It was important to start to look at how at the city as a whole, the city as an ecosystem, and the planning of a city, and how the planning of the city and the financial modeling of a city should go hand in hand, so that we are maximizing the opportunities of land value increment, land value sharing to finance the cities of the future. We then looked at the issue, what we're working towards then in UN Habitat, that often cities are looking for external sources of finance. And sometimes this is acting even as a disincentive for other revenue streams which would be locally generated. So there's a need for an understanding then of a city's financing ecosystem that includes transfers, own source revenue, possibly the ability to issue bonds, but also the ability to attract finance, and how these different streams need to work in harmony with each other, so that as cities strengthen their systems and strengthen their revenue systems and public financial management systems, at the same time they become credible as partners that can attract investment. So we need to understand a sort of a financing framework for cities that takes into account the sort of whole ecosystem. We also talked a bit about shocks and how increasingly there are risks related to unpredictability. So we talked about the political risks, the cancelling of major projects, but we also talked about, with climate change and natural phenomena as well as conflict, there's so much unpredictability that we need to build into financing models. So without further introduction, I'd like to start to introduce the panel that we have today, and we're going to go a bit further into these issues in order to really identify some of the key sort of policy points and the key areas of advocacy and areas of the interaction between policy, the finance world, and cities, then we need to be focusing on to unlock a greater flow of finance sustainably to cities. So I'm very pleased to first introduce Mr. Hutan Yazari. He's the Chief Investment Officer of the United World Infrastructure and Earth Tag Technologies. Please come and take the floor. And secondly, I'd like to invite Ms. Alice Charles. She's a director for cities, planning and design at ARUP, and has been very involved with the World Economic Forum and is no stranger to UN Habitat. So welcome, Alice. Cheers. Cheers. Thank you. Thank you. Third, I'd like to invite Mr. Christian Kunz, the Chief Strategy, Innovation and Ventures Officer at Dubai International Finance Center. Welcome. Thank you. Cheers. And then I'd like to invite Honorable Mayor Manuel de Araujo, the Mayor of Quiliman, Mozambique, also a long-time partner of UN Habitat, and he's been in several of our World Urban Forums. Welcome, Honorable Mayor. Thank you. And lastly but not least, Mr. Yuzan Yule, the Assistant General Manager of Borsa Istanbul in Turkey. Thank you so much. Yeah, you can sit here. Thanks very much. And I think I'd like to start the conversation when we talked about yesterday, this kind of holistic understanding of urban financing and the need for those involved in financing cities to understand cities as a whole rather than just shifting into projects. And I think this conversation had a number of elements. We talked a little bit about the limited investment in sort of societal impacts and in caring. And we sort of noted that a lot of these are sort of long-term objectives and don't return an immediate return on investment, but perhaps do in the longer term provide economic benefits, societal benefits, and improves the city. But it's quite difficult to kind of make this bankable or into a product. So I was wondering, first of all, maybe Hutan and Christian, maybe you can both look at the question of what does it take to be a long-term partner of a city? And what kind of products are in the market and what kind of approaches already exist that could be better mainstreamed to generate more kind of caring, more kind of social outcomes alongside the economic and environmental outcomes, which are more mainstreamed. Let's start with Christian, and then we have Hutan after. Thank you very much.
Does this work? Okay. First of all, great to be here. I think very important and interesting conversations we had yesterday and today. To come to your question, I think thinking about the long term and thinking about the community at the core of building urban developments, I think is very important. It's often overlooked, unfortunately. I think a good example where this thinking has been integrated quite for a long time is actually Dubai, and I obviously presenting Dubai International Financial Center. We're developing also communities, ecosystems, and so the development of let's call the DFC is a little bit like a city within a city, was always with a long-term view. And it was always with the entire ecosystem at the core of that conversation. So how do you bring together offices where you work with the spaces where you live and the spaces you entertain, and then how do you actually get those stakeholders and people within that community to engage and create synergies. And I think what that creates is a number of things. I think first of all, there's a lot of spaces in the bigger communities which are probably, if you had to develop them by itself, would not be financeable or bankable. But because they're part of a larger community project, a master plan, they become part of that overall business case. And so they're actually increasing the value of the overall master plan, the overall community, but by itself they would have not been financeable. The second thing, I think it also reduces risk and gives a lot of confidence. Because if I try to invest in a single project somewhere, an office tower, and I don't know what else is going to come around it, there's a lot of uncertainty and risk. So in these kind of big long-term projects that take often tens of years, you want as much confidence that there will be not just one building or two buildings, but there is confidence that there will be a big community, and there's a lot of interest of all stakeholders to make that a thriving community with the right stakeholders, which will also make it easier to attract then people to use these facilities and increase the value and the revenue generation over time. And I think that's very important. I think two more thoughts, and then I'll hand it over to my colleague. One is we should also think about the values in the society and the community in the way we finance. And I think in Dubai, in DFC, we have Nasdaq Dubai. It's the largest market for sustainable sukuk and overall sukuk, which is the Islamic equivalent to the bond. So we need to make sure we have also instruments that align with the values of the communities that live in it and the companies that want to invest in those products. And so I think understanding the values and aligning the way of financing these long-term projects with the values of the people that are interested in the success of these projects is very important. I think the other thing that we discussed yesterday that's also important in this context, especially where we see the economy kind of becoming a bit more difficult at the moment and in the next couple of years, how do we make sure that we build something for the future and not for today? And what does that mean? How do we understand that the way the project and the larger community or development is designed considers the trends of tomorrow and is built for a sustainable future? And I think there's a few more discussions around that, but I think these are a few things that we've seen important when you look at these larger scale projects, important to integrate community and people and their values into the projects, and by that itself increase the value and reduce the risk itself.
Thank you very much, Christian. Over to Hutan. Thank you.
Thank you. I think another element we have to understand here with regards to financing is risk. Very much at the heart of this, for any new city or any new major project or city overhaul, as a financier, you're being asked on to take a huge amount of development risk, and hence what one really needs to understand is for the financing to be viable and for it to ultimately then go on to develop communities and all this sort of stuff. We just have to take one step back and say, right, how do we address the risk profile to make it attractive for private capital to come in? Now, a city is, you could look at it like a startup, and if you look at the evolution of a startup, you start with seed capital, you bring in venture capital, then you do your series A, B, C, D, then you do an IPO, etc. And at each of those journeys, you're looking at a different risk profile. And so it is with the city. And I think it's very important that we look at the role of government, the role of new financing technologies, whether it's tokenization, Web3, digital currencies, which have a huge, huge application, and something we're actually working on deeply at the moment, in addressing that risk and helping that risk to be mitigated. And then as you start to see that risk profile going off, then you can see larger clusters of capital coming, which are essential to pushing forward this vision of developing a community and getting all of the symbiotic segments of a city to come together in order to create the vision and all the other wonderful stuff. But, at the end of the day, if you can't finance it, none of it can be realized. And we just have to be very pragmatic about it and pull governments and deep pools of capital with a different risk tolerance to help those projects get off the ground. And then it will bootstrap itself.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And coming back to the idea that, in a way, longer term planning, seeing the whole city, seeing that communities in what's currently an empty space is going to become a vibrant community and this kind of thing. And one investment then stimulates another and provides the case for a second investment, etc. So in this long-term planning, and it's interesting that you mentioned that this was a de-risking thing, because I think a lot of, I mean, I'm not a finance person, but I wondered whether something short-term might be less of a risk, you know, because you know that you'll get your money back and you'll make your profit in a limited time. So I'm quite interested to understand further how you feel that long-term planning actually de-risks investment. Do you want to elaborate a little bit further on that?
Yeah. I can do. I think that's an important point, because you know, you definitely need some degree of continuity. The initial risk capital does definitely have a shorter time horizon than the sort of 100 years or 50 years or whatever it is that you need to build a city from scratch. And I'm talking from experience, because at UWI we were involved in building a whole new city in the region of Johor in Malaysia, a city called Medini, which we were very, very heavily involved with. And we saw through that journey. Now, this is still a journey which has not been completed, and it continues to grow, it continues to expand, the community continues to thrive, and you know, there's been many different stages to watch this city come from effectively raw land into there being a Lego land and apartment buildings, malls, hospitals, schools, a sense of community, and it continues to grow in that sense. And so, speaking about it directly and firsthand, what I would say is, you know, there needs to be an element of continuity, which needs to come from an independent government association. It could be a sovereign wealth fund. It could be an independent body, much in the same way that you've seen, for example, central banks becoming independent from the ruling government, so that, you know, fiscal policy isn't driven by voting cycles. So if you have some institutions in place that can offer that continuity, that are agnostic to political leanings and the like, I think that's important. That also will give capital a lot more comfort that there will be that continuity, and if they need to invest money for 20 years, and there are some investment funds, especially infrastructure funds with 20-year plus time horizons, that would welcome that. And without that sort of continuity, that sort of capital can't be deployed. So it really depends on how you structure it, but there are definitely ways to structure it, and we've proven that there are. And it's called Medini City.
More about Medini City, and Christian, did you want to come back on this point as well?
Yeah, maybe two thoughts on this. I think I like the comment that cities to some extent could be like a startup. When I'm a high-risk, early-stage investor, I invest in three things. I invest in the vision of the company. I don't invest in the first product. I invest in the team that is building it and the capability that they can deliver. And I deliver in that this product and that segment actually will create value over time. And that gives me confidence to take a high-risk decision. And so I think the long-term view is important, because people, at the end of the day, it's people taking the investment decisions. And you need to really understand that the other side has thought this through for the long term. They have created a value proposition, exciting vision and community of development that is thought through how it will work and evolve. And you might not have figured out everything, but you've figured out how far you want to go. And that gives me a lot of comfort. Now then, in the delivery, you need the right people and you will stage it, but you will always have a bigger outcome in sight, and with that, the whole project becomes more valuable. And with that, the risk is lower, and that more people get excited and more people will join. It's much easier to build something big and start exciting people to follow you and then succeed, rather than building something small and trying to get the traction to convince others to come on board. That's also feasible, but it's much harder to do that.
Fantastic, and so I like the idea of cities as a startup and looking at some certain qualities of a city that you might be looking at if it was a business around the vision, the people driving this. Alice, we talked yesterday a little bit about political risk as well, and we've just heard the idea of having an instrument that will help provide that continuity. But maybe you can also share your experience a bit about setbacks when you are hit by a political risk, and the importance of even having sort of cross-party consensus on certain priorities. Maybe you can speak a bit to this. Thank you.
Yeah, so I guess when an investor is seeking to invest in an infrastructure project, there's a variety of risks that they have to consider. Political, geopolitical, climate, corruption, they're all the risks that are considered, and many more. But specifically in relation to political, there's many considerations that come to bear when it relates to infrastructure. So it can relate to instability, that there's constant elections, so there's going to be no continuity of government. It can relate to that there isn't a sort of a streamlined set of communications between national and regional and city government within a country. An example of that is that we often experience around the world that countries are often led by rulers that come from a more rural background, have a more rural constituency that elects them, and city leaders are obviously in cities, and they're often of a different political persuasion to the national government leader. So there may not be the incentive of national government to want to work with the city government leader in helping them to attract finance. But also, there often isn't a cross-party vision, and we just heard if you're investing in a startup, the criticality of having a vision. It's the exact same with regard to city infrastructure. You need to have a long-term vision, and ideally that vision is bought into, by all political parties. Infrastructure to sort of design, build it, operate it, over a period of time takes a lot more than the election cycle of the average mayor, which is 4 or 5 years. You're generally talking 50, 100 years for most pieces of infrastructure. So they're the types of considerations that are brought to bear when considering investing. So what are they looking for? They're generally, as I say, looking for a vision that is buy-in from all parties. And I mentioned this earlier today in my speech. They're looking for a pipeline of projects at the city level. They're looking that the city is serious about climate. And, all of the MDBs, when you speak to them at the moment, talk about how they have to lend in compliance with the Paris Agreement. And this is really difficult. It's particularly difficult in emerging markets where they may not have, for example, roads infrastructure, or they may not have aviation infrastructure, and there's all kinds of questions being asked when lending for that type of infrastructure. But actually, these are cities that didn't have that infrastructure in the first place, particularly in the global south, and they have every right to have access to that type of infrastructure, to provide greater connectivity and economic development for their cities. But even that is being questioned now. So they're looking for a city to be serious about climate. I guess, another thing which is connected to politics is geopolitical risk. And that's increasingly an issue. For example, when the war in Ukraine happened, it wasn't just, that there was capital flow from countries immediately surrounding Ukraine, but we also seen capital flow from countries that were not part of NATO, for example. So, so geopolitics is something that is also closely linked to political risk, and is increasingly something that's considered. How does it play out to your question? how does it play out for a company like us? So Arup is a company that, is a sustainable development consultancy. We employ a lot of engineers. We obviously design major infrastructure across the world. In this city, the airport, for example, is one of our projects. And so if a politician suddenly comes into office and just decides to cancel an infrastructure project, years of our work is just stopped. And then another politician can come into office a couple of years later and decide we want to reignite that project, but we want to design it in a different way. And we can't just pick up what was, produced before. We have to start all over. And that has happened, like, for example, we have been involved in a major project in a G7 country, high-speed rail project, and, it suddenly stalled. And we suddenly have hundreds of engineers who've been working on that project have to stop immediately. And it may well be ignited under a new political administration. But what does that mean? Is that infrastructure project the right project for the country? Yes. In terms of the long-term development of that country, it's the right project for that country. What it means is that we are delaying the delivery of that infrastructure. What it means is we are increasing the cost of delivering that infrastructure. And what it means is investors are less incentivized to invest in that country because they've seen what's gone before. So they're looking to understand your past record. They also will do due diligence on the political leaders themselves to understand if there's any sort of, transparency risk or corruption risk attached to them. So, it is imperative that that governments, national, regional, city government, are working together in putting their best foot forward to attract capital, and they are recognizing that they need to address the political risk issue, which is what the industry consistently talks about.
Wonderful. Thanks so much. And moving from political risks to shocks, I'd love to hear a bit from you, Honourable Mayor. I mean, you've been telling us about your city. I've met you a few times before, and we've talked about some of the really amazing projects that you have. I mean, Keliman is probably Africa's first cycling city. You can get anywhere on a bike, and that's been something which, putting cycle paths and all this sort of thing have been an investment, but also you've been investing in nature-based solutions and in a city that's prone to cyclones and this kind of thing. These nature-based solutions is a key thing around resilience. But you've been hit time and time and again, and tell us a bit about your experience, and is there a way to even be financially ready for other instruments that can deal with the kind of shocks that you experience? Over to you, Honourable Mayor.
Well, thank you very much. I mean, I would like to have all the answers for the question that you're putting here, but I confess that after listening to my colleagues on the panel, I think that I'm reaching a point that we are literally going or moving in different directions. Like local government and mayors are moving from south to north, and the financial world is moving from north to south. And I think that that's where the problem is. It's like the way funders or the financial sector looks, perceives, and accounts for risks, it's not the same way we in the local government look at those issues. And I think that unless we try to come up with the same understanding, it will be very difficult to do business. Those in the financial sector, they probably, most of the time, they have more information about the risks that we face than ourselves at the local. And they're not willing to share that because, that's part of their business. That's how they get money. And the example I normally give it's like you have a medical doctor who scans your body. He knows the kind of disease that you do have. Then he says, look, well, if you don't pay, I cannot share that information to you. But he knows that tomorrow you're going to die, and he will let you die because you are not able of paying for the service that he provides. So it's a market issue, but also it is a political issue. There are some variables both like on demand side, on the supply side. There are some variables that local governments can manage, can control, or can minimize. But there are others that, there's nothing we can do. Issues like political stability, issues like macroeconomic stability, like the very few cities, unless if you are like as big as Istanbul, like with 3 million people, probably there you can have some leverage, some power to negotiate with national government. But if you are an intermediary and small cities, your bargaining power is so small that literally you cannot change the political stability or the macroeconomic stability. Then what do? I mean, you try to work with the small or the few variables that you can control. And those are, of course, your own profile. You can work out on issues like corruption, like accountability, like transparency, to make your image, you as a leader, but also your municipality's image, be attractive to those willing to invest. That one you can do. But there are issues such as the legal framework. Like, for example, I will talk from the African perspective. You have like the French legal system, you have the British legal system, then you have the Portuguese legal system. Those legal systems are completely different. You have ceremonial mayors, they just go there to cut the, at the opening of whatever, a shop or whatever, but like they can't even deal with the budget. The ministry appoints somebody who they call permanent secretary. He's the one who signs the checks, and he is the one who have got the power and the veto power over the budget. So like you go there, you campaign, you make promises, but then you cannot deliver because you don't have the instrument. So it depends on the legal framework that they go, and like the kind of power and the kind of decentralization model that you have. And then you have the challenges about the human resource capability. Most of the cities don't have the capability to design, to implement, or even to have access to information. There is a problem about the asymmetric access of information. Just about companies like Arrow, how do I go from Kalimani City to Arrow? Wow. I mean, I'm lucky because I'm here. I can talk to Alice, and but 100, if not 1,000 of mayors, they don't have the chance that I do have to listen what you are saying. And then also, like, for cities like mine, like most 90% of the people there, they can't even master English, or they don't speak Portuguese. So like they're out of like half of the potential sources of funding and so on. Then you come with what you just said, with the unpredictability. Like this year, on the 12th of March, my city was hit by Cyclone Freddy. And like all the work I've been doing in the last 10 years just evaporated. It's like, it's a risk. It's a climate risk. Is the current financial architecture fit for purpose? I would say no, because when my city was hit by Cyclone Freddy in March, all the world came. The OCHA came, the UN representative came to my city. I mean, I was working at the airport to receive all those. Instead of dealing with the people who were suffering, who needed me, I was at the airport getting one come. The president of the republic came, the prime minister came, the UN came, all of them came, WHO and so on. But up to now, 7 months have gone, I haven't seen one single penny. The World Bank says they are still on their second stage, and they need to go up to fourth or fifth. So by the time the money from the World Bank arrives, like in my country from October to April, we have got the rain season. So but like by the time that money comes, probably we are hit by another cyclone, and then they will send a different team to come and then you go over and over again. And I can also like share the example of Beira. Beira is the second biggest city in Mozambique. In 2019, it was hit by Cyclone Idai. And according to the UN, 90% of the infrastructure of the city was destroyed. And then there was a donor conference, insurance companies came and so on. They made pledges. And today, since 2019, up to now, not even 1/3 of the pledged amount is delivered. And to make matters worse, the national government because they thought that, well, there may be an opportunity of funding coming, there is a donor conference, then we are going to create here a new body to manage things, like to make even things more difficult. And like the link between national government and the local government became even more strained, and just because the mayor of the city of Beira was from the opposition, then it became a no-go area. And up to now, Beira is there stuck. From bureaucracy, internal bureaucracy, political risk, instability, climate change, but also the inefficiency of the current international financial system. I mean, we can talk about so many risks. I mean, from political risk, economic risk, climate change risk, and so on. But the point is, at the end of the day, our term is for at most 5 years. By the time you start assembling the team to think about these big challenges, your term is gone. I mean, if you are lucky, you may be elected. I have been lucky because I've been there for 12 years. So like, I had time, I had the stability, but still, I'm not there where I wanted to be. Because to walk the talk, it's another story.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that experience, Honourable Mayor. And maybe, Alice, we were also talking earlier about that kind of maybe dysfunctional architecture in that there are insurance funds, but when the city most needs some support, it's kind of not there. Do you want to comment on some of the disconnects that we are experiencing? Thanks.
So I think what I was talking about is, and indeed we were talking about it, is if we think about insurance companies, they have all of the data on the risk associated with every city and every asset within those cities. And, you know, they don't even go to those cities, they just know about it, right? So, in terms of the way they gather data. So I guess most of them, the way they're currently reacting to it is, a lot of them are withdrawing from insuring those assets. We see it all over the world. You know, if an asset is flooded, for example, it won't receive insurance again. If there's a major weather event, it won't receive insurance again. So they're tending to withdraw from that market. Or in some cases, they are bringing in the asset owner and they're sitting them down and they're saying, okay, here's your situation. This is how you can mitigate your risk. I think what we need to see to a much greater extent is insurance companies stepping up and saying, we actually have a role to play in addressing this problem. And I think particularly insurance has a major role to play in addressing resilience and could be an investor in nature-based solutions within cities, a co-investor. And, you know, nature-based solutions are so important. And I mentioned this yesterday at our round table, but if you look at the investment patterns, even amongst the MDBs, generally less than 1% of their investments are in nature-based solutions. So I think there's a real role for insurance, like if they just keep withdrawing from markets, what are they actually going to insure? And I think there's a role for them to positively contribute and get involved in co-financing nature-based solutions.
Fantastic. Thanks for that. And we've talked a little bit about data in that, you know, sometimes the third parties or the insurance companies, they have a whole bunch of data that the city doesn't have. Maybe the finance industry has a set of indicators that they're working in. The city has a different set of indicators. And I'm turning now to Yuzan Gule, who's the assistant manager in Borsa Istanbul, because I think something you've been doing is working on indicators, useful indicators, indicators that sort of connect performance measurements of cities and performance measurements of finance, so that the two worlds are talking the same language. Maybe you can talk a little bit about this. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, first of all, I have some little notes that maybe this would just connect the two data and the exchange. So, being here as a representative from a finance company, well, I can just really liked about the startup definition of a city. And I would say that when you just go public, you're going to go to the stock exchange, so you are with us. So maybe we can just think about the startup and then the what should we do after we just get this stage overcome of the startup stage and then become a publicly owned company. I think we should just continue to do these, and so especially take care of the risks that we are talking about, and also maybe the financial literacy, maybe some answers to our Myers problems. So the money transfers and all the financing would just come from somewhere, like the financial institutions or the exchanges or the financial world, which is mostly the most important institution in the financial world. And also decentralization and the human resources are, if they are good enough in these financial institutions, starting from the publicly owned companies and going around all the financial institutions and to the financial world, then I think we can just handle these problems in the financial points like financing, the World Bank finance, and all the other things. So I think all the financial institutions should be a part of the problem, and the financial literacy should be from the financial literacy and the financial institutions literacy that just help to develop sustainable cities. So as our valuable moderator just said, the data which we have to use to measure the sustainability levels of the companies would also help to the cities, because as you know, all the companies belong to some cities. So cities are built up from the institutions, humans, and the housing. So one of the most important things in the financial is the financial world of the city. So to become more sustainable, starting from the companies, we are trying to increase the sustainability level of the companies and try to give the incentive for the investors to value the sustainability of the companies, so that this would just go wider and wider and just affect the lives of the citizens of the cities and also the sustainability level of the cities also. So what we are doing as Borsa Istanbul is that we had just started a sustainability measurement, which is the sustainability index of the companies since 2014, and last year we have just changed the methodology for the calculating the index. And so what was the main and the most important point in that change was that we wanted the companies to be publicly known what sustainability level do they have, so that the sustainability would just become an publicly recognized and publicly valued value for the companies, and also reflecting to all other areas coming to the cities also. So what we have done, we have just changed the company that we are working with, and now all the companies just give their values and the answer to the questionnaires of these companies, which is one of the world leaders in that area, and so that everybody would be able to see what is the sustainability score of that firm or company that is publicly traded, and so that they might just evaluate their investments according to this kind of selection criteria. And also we had just given very importance on the green financing, and also issuing some bonds and bills on the sustainability, and so that everybody would just reach to the sustainability financing through our exchange, and also value to the sustainable products that we have. So last year, the Capital Markets Board has just issued legislation over that sustainability, and so that the green financing and also the bonds and bills and the green scoops are structured, and so that even the municipalities would just be able to take some credits, take some loans, take some financing from the sustainability sensitive investors from the financial world. And as you know, if you cannot finance the sustainable growth or sustainable living, then it's very hard, like my honorable mayor just said. It's not possible to just go after the continuity of the sustainability. So we have to give some financial opportunities to the cities through the exchanges also and through the financial institutions.
Wonderful. And just a quick follow-up on this. I mean, it's one thing to have a kind of an index, and companies are submitting their scores to the index, and they're being measured in a way. Does that give them a competitive advantage when it comes to procurement and tenders and things like this?
Sure. And also, for example, they can use this score even while they're going to some credits. And as you know, if you would just have if you are a financial company, for example, a bank, and if you would just go for a foreign credit, and the consortium that you have abroad would just ask for your sustainability score. So this kind of a score would just help them to be able to finance their needs from abroad in a better way. And also they might just be more preferable or more interested by the international investors, because in the last few years we do really see that the financial world with the financial literacy would just value more and more on the sustainability and the green financing products.
Fantastic. Alice, did you want to come in with that, with a quick question there?
I actually wanted to come at it from a slightly different angle. You know, we have a lot of work to do if we're going to meet our climate targets. And one country that I think that has done a really good job in tackling their building emissions is actually the Netherlands. And I'm going to set out how, and I'm going to set out then how the finance sector come in around it. And it's just another way of looking at it. So the national government realised that, you know, a very significant piece of meeting their 2030 and their 2050 goals was to decarbonise their buildings. And national government worked with regional government, worked with city government, worked with civil society, academia, business, financiers, to come up with a pathway to decarbonisation. So they set a target for 2023, they set a target for 2030, and so on. So they set a pathway. So, for example, one of the targets that they had was by the 1st of January 2023, all commercially rented buildings would have to meet a building energy rating of a C or above. And that actually made the finance sector understand what they had to achieve. So naturally what they did was they reviewed their assets and said, okay, what assets meet this building energy rating, what do not? Those that don't are potentially going to be stranded assets with no value. We need to incentivise those that own these assets to retrofit these assets. So they met their target. But I think what was really interesting there is it made the banks live and breathe ESG investing and sustainability objectives, but it also gave industry certainty. There was a pathway. They knew where they were going. And I think it's a really good example that you could employ in a variety of different contexts for a variety of different types of infrastructure in other parts of the world. So it's kind of coming at it from another angle. The second thing I wanted to say is in relation to data. So in Arup, in the company that I work for, at COP26 we made two commitments. One was that we would not represent fossil fuel projects going forward, which we carried out. And the second was that we would do full life cycle carbon assessments for all of our buildings projects, whether our clients wanted it or not. So we actually gathered the data as we did that for projects, well over 1,000 projects so far in 30-something countries. And we have gathered that data and we call it a zero tool. But everybody wants that data. And we say to them, why is that data really of value? This is just one company gathering data for our clients' projects. It's also not our data, it's our clients' data. That data would only be valuable if you pool that data and an international organization develops a taxonomy around that data, pools that data, then that's only when that data is of value. So to come back to this data question and sharing data, I think if data is shared by an industry collectively, then it has value. But if it's just one company sharing data, then what is the value it really has, because it represents only a certain percentage of overall assets.
Wonderful. Thank you for that. And maybe if there's time, we'll maybe come back to that question a bit around any legislations or rules that should be in place around data. We have some questions from the floor. I think you've been putting some questions on Menti. And one of the questions, and I think, Hutam, you might be a good one for this. We learned that a lot of public money is used to sort of de-risk private investment. And, but also, around the world, there's a lack of kind of maturity, bankability, and investment readiness of cities. I think this question probably has a number of dimensions. The first is simply the kind of often wasted cost of project preparation, and is there sort of quicker and using technology and other ways to actually reduce that kind of huge cost that accumulates, and which is often publicly or philanthropically funded. But secondly, what needs to happen to change this, to improve the investment readiness of cities so that they can work more effectively with sources of private capital? Maybe let's hear first from Hutan, and then other panelists are welcome to come in on that question. Thanks.
Often when we're asked to participate in conferences with regards to finance, it's kind of been seen as them and us. Yeah. It's the financiers and the people who need financing. Now, technology has helped pull that gap somewhat, and it will continue to bring those who have capital and those who need capital. We can talk about blockchain, Web3, etc. We could talk about AI and an improvement in the way that the bridge is gapped, or the gap is bridged, I should say, so that the lenders have the information that they need and the borrowers know how to augment that. And it comes also back to this whole notion of data and having that readiness. So what I think really needs to happen here is that cities need to understand that they need to build long-term relationships with the finance industry. You need a banker to come and advise you. Just like any company has a collection of bankers that they talk to, who are advisors, who understand. In the United States, you see that with municipalities who are constantly raising money. Some of them have gone bankrupt now, but the ones who've managed to keep those relationships, who have been tapped into the capital markets, who understand, I think that's important. And it really has to be understood that the success of a project is innately in the interest of the banker, because you're managing your credit risk, you're managing your reputational risk, your market risk, but it also will lead on to further lead-on work. If the project starts to grow and if it starts to flourish, there will be other pools of capital that are required. There'll be other products that the finance world will like to bring in there. So from my perspective, I think it's really understanding that the finance sector needs to work hand in hand to help educate and to work, and for both sides to understand each other more closely, so that it isn't a them and us. It should be a partnership moving forward.
Fantastic, thank you for that. Yes, Manuel.
Well, it sounds very beautiful the way you are putting it. But again, I will come from the global south, where the political volatility of the system and the fact that if we are talking about democracy, the turnover, the medium terms of for a mayor, at best, is like 10 years. So like, most likely, every 5 years, you will have a change. So like, how do you build that relationship? Because there also needs to be a long term. But like, for a mayor's perspective, what he's trying to do is to make sure that his voters are happy so that they can vote him again. So like, quick deliverables, okay? Because he cannot think, he should think, but we are humans, so we look at our priorities. So the priority for a mayor is the 5 years. The amount of time you're going to spend to think for a project that will come 25 years in the road, he doesn't have the incentive to do that. So how are we going to bridge that gap? I understand from the financial world, like, of course, the more stable, the less turnover is the better, because it gives like a kind of confidence in the institutions, in the city. But that's not how the real world works.
Yeah.
So how do we bridge that gap?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And again, this is, if you think back to the answer to the first question I was giving, with regards to a separation of certain responsibilities from the more high turnover political environment, just like we've seen with the central bank. In some countries, you have an independent central bank. You need independent bodies that are not elected, that are not having to focus on short-term financing streams to get re-elected. There is an element of that, and that's more on the operating side. But capital projects, you cannot put those necessarily in the hands of a high volume, high turnover body. And so we have to think about that, and it's a tough one, because there are many important decisions that you as a mayor will have to take. And it's very difficult to see what are those institutions that we should put in place, and would that curtail your power? And would that, ultimately be to the detriment of people? Or do you have more long-term infrastructure planners who will not change, and you are more responsible for some of the more short-term policies and the like there? And that's a tough one.
I just want to come in on this discussion because, having worked with many cities across the world on a variety of projects, things that I've seen work really well is where you have the political buy-in from the elected representative, but you have a cross-city civil service team that is responsible for delivering transformative projects. But they realise they're not going to be able to do it alone. And they really go out to get that support, whether it's a national government agency that can bring resources in to give them advice, whether it's a multilateral development bank. Most people think of a multilateral development bank as a lender, but actually it's an advisor. And also, they've often worked quite effectively with G20 development agencies to maybe fund them in terms of that capacity building, second resources in some instances. So I've seen that kind of model work really well. Critical team in a city, and often in that case, the city has divided the city into strategy, which is very much focused on what is the long-term vision for the city, critical mega projects they want to deliver, operations, which is day-to-day, and you can bring about change in that day-to-day that will also meet the needs of your electorate day-to-day. So, and so it doesn't necessarily have to be that you have to set up this agency within the country that's independent. You can work with the resources that you have, but don't be afraid to ask for help from organisations like, in your case, like the African Development Bank or some of the development agencies, you know, French, whatever it is, Swiss, etc., that will offer support and help.
We're going to have to bring this conversation to a close, and as we do, maybe we can just ask each panelist, and we've got literally 3 minutes, so you've got 30 seconds each, to describe one important game changer, one intervention that you would say needs to move forward. We've talked about a few. We've talked about this continuity, this kind of institution that guarantees continuity. You've talked about these kind of project teams, you know, in a way that provides that sort of long-term support to implementing projects and financing projects. So just one intervention that's going to really unlock finance for cities. Let's start with Hutan. We'll come this way. Thanks.
I think the way that we are going to interact with money in the next 20 years is going to be completely different from where we are today. The rise of digital currencies is going to completely redefine the way that lending and decentralized decision-making is going to be much more supportive of socially based projects, and that's an area which a lot of work needs to be done. Thank you very much. Christian.
Clearly, by listening to the different views, I think it's clear that this is the problem for smaller cities and bigger cities and the global north are very different. So there's not one solution that fits all. And it is also clear that this is becoming it's an unprecedented challenge that is becoming more challenging. So we need to find unprecedented solutions for that. I think the only way, we talked a lot about a new financial architecture and a rethinking the financial supply chain. What I think we need is something which is a sustainable financial urban development programming language, because we need much more speed. And if you think about, we talked about startups, if you think about programming, the way that has been evolved through open source, through automation, through digitization, through bringing people and small problems together, but in a decentralized way, not by centralizing it, and by making it easier and free to access even the smallest information and data, and teaching people all over the world the same language to work together. That's something, in my view, that is needed to solve this problem.
And feel free to talk about corruption.
I totally echo everything that Christian just said, and I think the other thing is that I think we probably do need an independent cities financing organisation, whether that's a cities development bank, because the way our systems are constructed, they're constructed to deal with member states rather than cities. The other thing that we didn't talk about on this panel is land, and how wealthy cities are because of the land that they own. And I think some of the most well-financed projects that we've came across globally in infrastructure is where a city or a country has used its land really, really well, or where, you know, a city has borrowed against the value of its assets, recognizing the value associated with its assets. So recognizing value of land, recognizing the taxation instruments that you can put in place in terms of land value capture are critically important, and that's a place that any city can start.
Excellent, thank you very much. Manuel.
Well, I think that we need what I will call a financial pragmatic shift. In this, as Alice said, the current financial architecture was conceived and designed to deal with countries. We need a completely new model that is thought through to respond to the needs of cities. And as also, as Alice said, the way assets are perceived by local government are quite different the way those investors are looking at those assets. So like, most of the assets are not valued as such. And actually in some countries, like in my own country, it's the legal system, the legal framework, they actually devalue the land. Because my country's constitution says that you cannot sell or buy land. So like, you are demotivating. Like, land is one of the main factors of production for wealth creation. So like, the only resource you have, you are disabling it in the process of wealth production. So unless we really rebuild or build a new financial system, and that will need, as I said, a complete paradigmatic shift to take into account those assets, those realities. Because what we have been trying over and over again is try to adapt a model which was built for national to the cities, which is, I think it's not working. And two examples. One, I think, when I talk about financial, the kind of paradigmatic shifts I'm talking about, it's like what happened with mobile money. Like in Kenya, they came up with M-Pesa. So like before, for you to have access to money, you needed to go physically to a bank. The shift, the paradigmatic shift was like, now you don't need to build those banks in the rural area. You know, you can send via, you know, the internet. And the second is like the phones network. Before, for us to have, for you to have a phone, you needed a line to go to your home, literally. You needed to see it. But then we had a pragmatic shift where you don't need that wire there. So like, you know, that kind of change is I think, what we need. It's not a continuation, a replication, or adaptation of the current model. But how do you do that? I mean, we all need to sit and think about it. But to me, that's what is required. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much, Honourable Mayor. And lastly.
Well, we have a long way to go. That's for sure. But I think we have to just do firstly fragmentation. So we have to just have everything one by one, which is on the manageable sizes. And we have to have the transparency, especially with the carbon market and the MRV systems and all the transparency, who is doing what. Because whatever you do as the municipality, if the companies are not following you, then that's nothing nothing to do. So we have to be transparent, and the literacy. So everybody should learn what is sustainability is in real terms, not in the some fantastic words, but also the meaning and the results and everything. And also the financial literacy should come after this literacy, because we have to understand what we are talking about and what we are financing about and what should be valuable while we are financing. And as we talked before, the data, the transparency and the collaboration should be our first targets to manage these, I think.
Thank you so much. Thanks for this. So just to wrap up, thank you very much, panelists, for this fantastic conversation. I think we started with the idea of the city as a startup, and being able to have a long-term vision and to get trusting that vision, trusting the people behind it, then instruments that can help to support a long-term investment and a multi-project investment, not an individual project, but a city as a whole ecosystem. It's been good then to sort of start unraveling this and looking at some of the challenges along the way, the political risks and how these are dealt with, other types of risks such as cyclones, and how there's a need to create instruments around several of these risks, etc. And I like some of these innovations that have been coming up at the end, and this idea that, yeah, perhaps there is a need now for a bank for cities, or an instrument for cities, and the idea that Manuel was saying about we're living in an age, and you're talking about digital currency and things like this. We're living in an age where we can leapfrog clunky systems and move into something completely new. Blockchain and others provide that opportunity. So it would be very interesting to sort of see what can be done quite in quite a revolutionary space. And I really appreciate all my panelists here this afternoon. And I know that you have planes to catch, so I will release you to get your planes. So let's give a hand to these excellent panelists. Thank you very much.
Well, yes, please. I would really, yeah.
And as you're leaving, we can play a video, and then we'll ask the next speaker to come up. So, Erastus, do you want to put the video on? Great, thank you so much.
Did you know the battle for sustainable development will be won or lost in cities? Today, 55% of the global population lives in urban areas, and this will increase to 68% by 2050. The Sustainable Development Goals, SDGs, are a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure that all people enjoy peace and prosperity by 2030, pledging to leave no one behind. Around 2/3 of the Sustainable Development Goals are relevant to cities. UN Habitat's SDG Cities Global Initiative is an SDG accelerator for cities for positive change. It has been developed and piloted by UN Habitat and is set to support 1,000 cities and positively impact 1 billion lives. Joining SDG Cities means joining a partnership where cities are guided through the 4-track program of data, strategic planning, institutional effectiveness, and investment and implementation. We provide cities with various tools and delivery models. In the data track, cities can access and use data to describe their baseline on SDG achievement. The strategic planning track ensures that cities develop a sustainable development strategy. In the institutional effectiveness track, cities strengthen their local institutional capacity in urban planning, governance, finance, and services to support strategic plan implementation. In the investment and implementation track, SDG Cities avails the city's investment facility that helps cities package impact projects, conduct upstream project preparation, and bankability guidance to ensure financial close. To incentivize and award cities for the commitment to the local implementation of the SDGs, our program recognizes cities' progress with the stages of silver, gold, platinum, and diamond. Are you ready to be an SDG city? Join today!
That's great. Thank you very much, panelists. And now we are we're looking forward to welcoming now. Mr. Dinesh Nambiar. He's the chair of Lend-Lease Malaysia. And, you know, we've been talking about concepts, we've been talking about challenges, and what we're looking at now is real stories. So I'm pleased to welcome Mr. Nambiar onto the stage. Thank you. Great. Thank you. Please give a hand, give a round of applause. Thank you. Yeah, let's just sit in the middle there. There we go. Great. So, over to you to start. I'll leave you introduce yourself and the work that you're doing. Thank you.
Do you prefer this? Yes. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's a pleasure and a privilege to be here to join this forum. Yesterday and today we've had some very interesting, informative and educational conversations, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank UN Habitat, Uskudar, and also Think City for giving me this opportunity. Now, my presentation in the short time will be at a helicopter level of one or two projects which fall into the sustainable urban regeneration space. And I will give you a little bit of background about who we are and what we do before I talk about the projects. And I'll start by quoting the founder of Lend-Lease. Lend-Lease is an Australian public listed company, 75 years old. And 50 years ago, in 1973, at the annual general meeting, the founder of Lend-Lease, whose name is Dusseldorf, said that a time is coming when companies will have to prove their real worth to society for the social and environmental impact rather than just straight profits. Prophetic words, 50 years ago, long before ESG and long before anybody thought about climate change. So Lend-Lease has had sustainability in its DNA from the beginning. So the company itself is, the strategy is to become an investment-led business, which is what we are. And what we largely do is we use our business model to manage and create mixed-use precincts, communities, civil and social infrastructure. And we do that because we have three branches in the company, three platforms. We have an investment management business, we have a development management business, and we have a construction management business, which is mainly project management. So we fund, we develop, and we operate the facilities. And what we do is we employ our placemaking and integrated business model in gateway cities. So at the moment, at the present time, we operate in 17 global cities around the world, and we deliver urbanization projects and investments that generate social, environmental, and economic value. So it's a very busy slide, and I'll keep this very brief. There are 17 cities, 4 continents, Australia, Asia, Europe, and America. And we have a platform of funds under management, 48 billion Australian dollars. We have assets that we manage, 33 billion, a development pipeline of 124 billion, and a construction pipeline of 8.7 billion. And there are projects in each of these cities. Some cities have urban region projects. Some cities just have smaller projects, or we are pure service providers. Our sustainable investment platform works on the basis that our fund business aspires to the highest sustainability benchmarks. So they win a lot of awards regionally and internationally. The assets that we develop aspire to reach the highest rating, the rating tool used in that particular environment. Of course, in most places we use LEED in Asia, for example, but in each country there are rating tools. And then we have environmental stewardship that we do with low carbon strategies, green leases, and continual sustainability action plans. And then we work with communities and contribute to the community by way of physical facilities and social interaction. Again, another busy slide, but the key message from this slide, ladies and gentlemen, is that if you look at the greenhouse gas emissions, property and, or rather building and construction contribute 39% of the world greenhouse gases. Now, 28% is operational and 11% is embedded carbon. And you've got the scope 1, scope 2, and scope 3. And in Lend-Lease, our global mission zero is to be net zero by 2025, not far away, 2 years' time, in scope 1 and 2, and to be absolute zero by 2040 for scope 1, 2, and 3 without the use of offsets. So a very ambitious target. I will talk during the projects about some of the funding we do, but generally, globally, as we have been discussing, there have been more and more opportunities to use green funds. So we've raised a few months ago a green bond for $1 billion Australian dollars, which is then used to blend it with traditional funding for projects in the US, in Asia, in Malaysia, in Australia, and the UK. There are more and more innovative funding mechanisms coming. For example, we recently raised something called the SLL, Sustainability Linked Loan, which is for an operating asset. We acquired an asset, and the way the Sustainability Linked Loan works is that there are sustainability project targets on an annual basis, and if these targets are met, then there's a compression in interest rates, which is the incentive for the developer, for the owner, asset owner, to continue to improve the sustainability performance of the asset. So there are increasing number of sustainability or instruments, financial instruments, that are coming to the market, and we continue to try to use them. I now move on to some of the projects. I'm going to touch on 2 projects and talk a little bit more about a third, which is the one in Malaysia. Barangaroo South is pretty much completed project today. It's on 22 hectares on the western edge of Sydney, and it was a piece of land that belonged to the Sydney City Council. It was put out to tender, Lend-Lease won it, and it was won on the basis of the highest level of sustainability had to be achieved, and it was designed to be one of the most environmentally sustainable urban precincts in the world. It's 600,000 square meters, so 6 million square feet. Many of the buildings, or really virtually all the buildings, are completed, and the buildings have achieved the highest rating for sustainability in Australia, which is a Green Star. 6-star Green Star is the highest rating, and the tower on Barangaroo South was the first building to achieve that in Australia. Now, sustainability-wise, it's carbon neutrality, water positive, zero water emissions, and community well-being are the high-level sustainability achievements that I've identified for this presentation. So it is the first urban precinct in Australia to be awarded carbon neutral status. 20% reduction in embodied carbon for all buildings have been achieved to date. And there's over 6,000 square meters of rooftop solar panels, which is one of the largest in the Southern Hemisphere. It's also water positive, which means that the water is captured, treated, recycled, and reused. There's more water captured, treated, recycled, and reused than the drinking water that's consumed in the precinct. And up to 100 million liters of water is saved annually by precinct-wide recycled water treatment plant and the use of chill water plant with harbor heat rejection. There is zero waste emissions. In our aspiration to go with zero waste, we built 2 buildings in timber, cross-laminated timber from sustainably managed forests. They deliver low carbon footprint and generate zero production waste. And there's a whole series of programs done with the community. And then Elephant Park, similarly, a project in London, large urban regeneration project to gentrify a part of London and build it to the highest sustainability standards. And the last project, which I will spend a few minutes on, which I have. is the Tun Razak Exchange in Kuala Lumpur. Now, we've been talking quite a lot about, in the last 2 days, about how urban regeneration works in different cities. Now, in this particular development, this was a 28-hectare development on the fringes of the city, the CBD. The government decided that this would become the new financial center of Kuala Lumpur. And they commissioned a master plan. The master plan was completed, and then they commenced a tender process to select partners and purchasers for individual parcels of land. So as Lend-Lease, we participated in this tender. Sorry. I think... yeah, so we participated in this tender. We were successful in securing it. And the whole model of this, which I'll explain shortly, was that the government would build the broader infrastructure, and developers would buy the parcels and fund some of that infrastructure. And then there would be concessions granted to other infrastructure owners. Now, this is a significant project. 2 million square meters over 28 hectares. Our portion of the master plan is about 30% of that 2 million square meters, and we are building retail, residential, hotels, and offices. We commenced design of this sometime in 2015. I'm having some trouble with the electronics. Sorry. And the project was designed, and I'm not going to run through all the sustainability measures, but the project is designed to be, the township is designed to be LEED Gold and what we call GBI, Green Building Index Platinum, which is the highest level of rating you can get in Malaysia. So there's a whole series of measures taken in terms of materials. There's a park on the roof, which as part of the social give back to society, to the town, to the city, has to be built and handed back to the municipality, but managed by us. So the ownership of the park, which is on the roof of the retail, belongs to the city of Kuala Lumpur and available to the public. The structure of the whole joint venture, the structure of the whole development to now that was the roads, tunnels, and the master developer went into various concessions for water, wastewater to be treated as potable water. They granted a concession to Veolia from France. The power is generated through the electricity board. And then there are local authorities and contractors providing the rest of the infrastructure. There is also a sharing of infrastructure with the city, with government, because in the process of expanding the city by this extent, the developer is also improving the infrastructure of the city. So there's been a sharing of infrastructure costs with the city. And then in our case, we went into a joint venture with the master developer to develop it. And the whole of the precinct, when it is completed, will be managed by a district management entity, which is under a common estate arrangement. And so the whole thing is a public-private partnership. The government stays in it right through and helps deliver the infrastructure, but private sector participates in the development through the purchase of land. Next slide, please. Okay, so that's a picture of this slide. It's not just a picture, by the way. 5 towers have been completed and occupied on the site. The retail, which is about 130,000 square meters, will open in 28 days on the, or thereabouts, on the 29th of November. The park is ready and ready for use by 29th of November. And the project is well underway. So this is an example, Daifed, of a public-private partnership, urban regeneration, working with government, and delivering something that's a development that's a city-defining development, because it is KL's financial center. And with that, time is running out, and I'll wrap up.
Thank you so much. That's been an incredible presentation. Please do give us a round of applause. No, thank you very much. And I think the point we see in here is the vision of the founder 50 years ago is being played out and is becoming more and more relevant now. And I love the fact that while we're talking about carbon neutrality, water positivity, zero waste, we're also talking about community well-being. And as we receive the Green Building Index Platinum Award, the highest level for green buildings, you're also providing a social return in the park. And I just think these models, especially when it comes to large-scale developments, are really the type of models that need to be replicated. And sometimes I think our attention should be much more on working with large private sector developers and consultancy companies mainstreaming SDGs in their work, because essentially these are the people who build our cities. And huge congratulations to Lend-Lease on this amazing project, and thank you so much for your presentation. So we have, so I'll leave you to, thank you so much, thank you. So we've come to the end of our panel discussion and our session on sustainable urban finance. And we have a little break now. There's coffee and hopefully some cakes and things just outside. And the next session will start here at 5 o'clock. So you've got about 15 minutes, and see you back. Thank you.